in the breakdown of our society today is that we then don't develop these mores and good social insights to how we
Right.
should behave in public and with other people. And then it just degrades culture, right? So we become overwhelmed and there's over control, right? So we have people trying to control everybody.
Welcome back to Illuminating Being. I'm here today with Dr. Keith Summers, our reoccurring co-host, who's a steady voice for really what actually works and kind of having that really connected spirit with our children as my favorite pediatrician. So today we are going to talk about, well, it's kind of a technical term. So, but I know that, you read it in one of your many avenues, competitive detachment. So we're going to just jump right in because I think we're definitely in this space and it's very relative to all the things that we talk about. So,
Yeah.
Dr.
Thanks.
Summers, kind of
Dr.
define that for our
Dr. Cook,
audience.
it's great to be here. And yeah, I think it's what we've sort of at the end of last year sort of stumbled on this evolved nest philosophy, sort of just repository of indigenous worldview on sort of healthy sort of ways of living, right? And looking at the world in ways that we need to sort of regain our sort of inner strength and some guidance on how to sort of like step it back. And it's a lot of comparison of like the dominant worldview and this indigenous worldview. Like we're living in a world where people are trying to dominate everybody.
Yeah.
And I think this is trying to get back to not individualism, but just getting back to the person.
Right.
And this cycle of detachment.
The
So
cycle of competitive detachment.
detachment. So just to sort of like frame it, they do have this sort of cycle of cooperative companionship. So to put it in the offset of like the detachment part is sort of, I'll say the negative, but sort of like where we're, I think, living in much of what's happening. Not everybody's living in that world. There are certainly components and people who are living healthfully and living with some of these, you know, we like to identify and name ourselves in certain ways. And so not everything has to be named.
Yeah. And what was just for my, the,
Yeah.
the other cycle?
So it's the companionship care from consent. So it's a path to wellness, a cycle of cooperative companionship.
Cycle of cooperative companionship is the opposite of the cycle of competitive detachment. And I
Attachment.
guess the goal here is, leaning into this space, it's we're to define it as plain language
Right.
and then really kind of share, what it looks like with the kids and parents.
Right.
And, from a cultural pattern, really, like why have we come from that space of connection to now
Right.
where we're in this space of really individualism. So this is a much deeper episode than maybe our typicals. So, and over time, we have seen this phenomena slip into this really detachment, right? We have
Yeah.
less support, we have more stress, we're finding more disconnection. So that's the cycle that we really want to think through and maybe, how do we bring it back? How do we reconnect? How do we, pivot away from the detachment and remember where we truly can thrive is with this.
And if we
And
look at, my life, think of it, my grandfather, came to America in the early 1900s. It was just the beginning of technology and radio. So they listened to the radio and the shadow and all these great. So it was a little bit of like the storytelling, which I think didn't sort of take away from our nurturing and our family life. And it was very family oriented because everybody would sit around in those times. And then the telephone came into being so we could connect with people. So those were some good things. And then we got television and we got computers and now we've got the internet. And so you know, we're going to harness I think we have to look at these as tools is what I try to sort of frame things as. And
Mhm.
so like ChatGPT, none of these are going to solve our problems, but they can be used like anything for good or bad.
Right.
And so I think the question is, I think the indigenous people looked at the world and I think it's not that they can't acquire some of the new tools and live with those, but how do you use them as the tools to sort of help promote what is helpful and nurturing? And so I think this sort of cycle has to do with like the evolved nest is that, you have a little nest and think of birds maybe. And
Mhm.
so the mother and the father birds. I mean, they have to sort of feed these babies, and then nurturing takes a process. But then the evolved nest is not that it ends at any one point. You then go from being that little chickadee or whatever to a full grown adult, and then you continue, and then you have to sort of give back, right? So it's like you don't stop maturing and developing, but you acquire new skill sets. And how we can do this with the evolved nest and looking at this sort of detachment piece is sort of like what goes wrong, or what have we imposed in the system that makes it more challenging to sort of develop the companionship versus the detachment. And a lot of things that we do in society, like we don't have, I mean, my thing that I would like to see is more maternity paternity leave, right? Because to me, that's where we establish the most important connection. And if you have to go back to work in 4, 6, 12 weeks, it's definitely going to put a little bit of crimp in that attachment, right? And
Right.
so then it's a balancing act. It's not that we can't do it, like we're survivalists, right? We'll figure out a way to do it, but there will be a cost. And for some of the kids we see, and I see it every day now, right? Much more, because the challenges for parents balancing work and raising your family have become truly overwhelming.
Right, and it's kind of, I say this word a lot, but like, I'm a very reflective being, but part of my childhood was this idea of safety and
Mhm.
consistency. And so I've used that word safety a lot with some other my peers. And I remember someone like abruptly asking, like, why do you keep saying safe? Like, did something happen to you? And I'm thinking, like,
No.
no. And the fact that like, to me, I'm like, the idea, is as we evolved, the basic principle of child rearing was, and the main like single purpose is to create a safe and consistent environment for the children to thrive in. So kind of like the whole phenomenon of keep it simple, right? Like we've lost kind of that idea. I think basically because of all of the ways we've been now able to be fed information where you're now
Yeah.
comparing and like assuming that if you don't give the child, the best of all or all of the activities and all of it, right, that you're failing or you're constantly behind, and then the whole cycle of resent and maybe guilt, and and then you become decision fatigued, and then I think a big phenomenon is parents start to feel very alone even when they're surrounded because of this like cycle. Just
Right.
kind of like spinning that. But like, so thinking about, we've talked about what it is, what are some behaviors that maybe you observed that like to any parents listening, what can be observed of like what a child being maybe possibly dysregulated or feeling a little bit disconnected or unsafe, even if that you are giving them or believe you're
Right.
giving them the space. Maybe it's showing up in ways that
Well, I
we
think that, irritability, sleeplessness, I mean, I think these are the basic sort of phenomena. I mean, the neurophysiology, neurobiology of kids is sort of to develop some self-regulation. And so always we can't impose anything. Like, people want to sleep train. We've got this sort of like, I'm going to do this by this point. I'm going to, this is sort of my checklist of things like what I'm going to do. This is success in parenting. Um, and I mean, we've succumbed to this too because in our visits now, I mean, it's overwhelming. I don't know how parents do it either. We've got questionnaires up the wazoo as far as are we meeting all these milestones? And every time they come in, you've got to fill these out. And when you're a teenager, we're doing all these PHQs and anxiety. I mean, okay, yeah, we do have an anxious society and we do have depression. And did we manufacture that?
right.
Maybe. And so I think, are we also part of the problem? I mean, it's just hard to push back when the system is saying, you have to do this. This is part of your visit. They're grading me on, did I check all these boxes? And why didn't they answer these? And then if they answer something and it's highlighted, is there self-harm? I mean, we've created it's a reflection of where society is. There's no question, right? It's not that there weren't stresses when I was growing up or when you were going to school. I mean, many of these things existed, but I think the sort of microscope that people are under now of performance. And I mean, I have kids that, I mean, we played a sport, it was maybe one season, right? You didn't have it year
Right.
round. I mean, now you're committing when you're 5 to be on X, Y, or Z, gymnastics, basketball, baseball. I mean, how can you just be a kid, when you just wanna, like, throw the ball around and have some fun, right? But you've gotta it's this competitiveness thing, right? And I get it. There are always gonna be kids who have some natural ability, and playing one sport might be the way to go.
Right,
And
like
then, the overscheduling, like, you've got kids that are out and parents are out 6, 7 nights a week. So
yeah,
then getting back to our previous discussion about food economics or food planning, like how do you plan if you're on the go and you're not home? And whose
right.
responsibility is it? And if both parents are working, we sort of create this sort of like, hamster running on the wheel that they just keep running, 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 and they're not going anywhere.
Right, like it linking it to our food, there's a hidden cost. It's not just mood of the children and the parents. It's overall health. It's
Right.
the relationships that are being formed. It's money because of the cost of having to do all those things. And it's kind of becomes the culture of building your home. So like
Right.
now we're detached, we're dysregulated, we spend more, we waste more. Oh my God, it's like so obvious. So how do we just like what are some guidance of like keeping it simple?
Right. I think,
The stress
making
is healthy, but not at that level, right?
Right. And I think that's where, the reality is, I think in the first 3 to 5 years is really establishing some sort of baseline sorts of, activities, nature, like doing things that enhance the parent's development as well as the kid. So it's, we're trying to do everything for the child, but it really is twofold, right? So the parent has a huge part and role and is part of their own development as a parent. Because maybe somebody's not saying you're doing a great job, Liz, right? And you need to hear something about like it's hard to raise a kid. It's like I didn't get any sleep last night, and it's like, well, that's just parenting, you
Right,
know,
like,
deal with it, right?
stuff it down.
Right. And so some simple things can just be like, yeah, I hear what you're saying. That was a rough night. There are simple ways for us to sort of acknowledge each other's challenges and place without saying you're good or bad, but just that this is reality,
Right.
right? And that also kids just need to see that too. Like they don't need to see that we're the one thing that I try to also emphasize to families is that perfection is not what we're looking for here because that is just going to take you down a road where one, it's unattainable and
And who defined the perfection? Because then
right. And
now you're in a space of comparison immediately.
I think it's how do I get better? Right. So yeah, you want to be
Yeah,
the
like, what are
best at
3 little practices or small
right.
overalls?
Right. So, you get to the top of the mountain, then where do you go? Right? I mean, it's one thing to sort of say, I want to climb the mountain because there's a mountain there, and then there are other mountains. But if only climbing that mountain is the ultimate goal, then what do you do with the rest of your life? Right? So if climbing mountains is important, then yeah, there's multiple mountains and you climb taller ones and shorter ones. Getting a full life experience, I think to me, that's reading books, things we talk about. That's the one thing I think from a nurturing standpoint and comparing the companionship versus the detachment is that doing things that bring you together, right? So holding your kid when they're infants can't spoil them. I mean, they're going to fall asleep and sleep in their own bed eventually, but they need contact in the
Yeah.
beginning. By putting them in the crib and in their own room early, I mean, yeah, they need to sleep, but there's no reason they can't be close. They can't
You're
be
making me think of that I think we mentioned her before, that doctor from, the 1930s in Germany that wrote a book about, like, the number one way to make someone a disciple of authoritarianism is strip them from the mother's bed and stick them in another room. I
oh,
simplified that, but and sadly,
that's detachment.
yeah, we have generational lineage that are still educating mothers that they shouldn't be like sleeping. Yeah, but like
Yeah.
truthfully, that connection, right? That ability
Right.
to feel a value even when you're in that infancy stage is so impactful. It seems.
And I think and it's not to overblow this to say that I mean, I think people have a lot of goodness in them in general. I mean, I don't think that we're evil from birth or anything like that. I mean, this isn't to sort of like disparage people, but I think we're trying to sort of create a sort of like return to some common sense. Like that's The thing that I try to talk to parents when I see them in the hospital with their newborn, I said, the two things you need to get started are just common sense and a sense of humor, right? You just
Right.
need basic things. You don't need the internet. You don't need, yes, you can have some value from your parents and grandparents because they've had an experience that you may decide you don't want to do everything like they did it, but they did a lot of good things, right?
But
And
and
identifying them.
just, like, thinking about well, a couple, like, actions you could take, but I'm thinking also, like, the language around the child parent. You are evolving in that relationship to begin with, like, for the first 3 to 5 years, you're in predominant, like, caretaking mode because the dependency is high,
Right.
and then you are the teacher. I mean, if you think about it, you are the voice, you are the role model, where you're educating, hopefully, some fundamentals that
Right.
allows their increased independence, and then you get into, like, coaching mode where they have true autonomy and,
Right.
adolescence, and there is a natural phenomena occurring where
Right.
adolescents, they are beginning to detach psychologically and physiologically, I said that word wrong, from said parent because they are getting prepared to flee the nest, and so I think we also lost that language at the same time of this detachment cycle that we've created. Then we also have this attachment of like, well, who do you think you are? But really, it's a natural evolution to become the coach. And then as a adult parent to adult child is you're a consultant. You're well respected, you're present, you're available, but like you're there when they, with their extreme independence, connect.
Right.
And I feel like
Yeah.
that conversation has been
Right.
broken. Like there's this
But I think I would just reframe it to say that I think the attachment part is sort of critical as far as grounding for parent child relationship. I think what happens more in adolescence, I think it's more independence than
right.
detachment.
Yeah.
So I
But
think,
I think we then qualify or, like, we want
right.
to say, "Well, they're
I think
detaching from
you're
us." It's like, "Well, no, they're in a healthy way becoming an independent being with
right.
autonomy."
But I think to your point, we have more detachment than independence.
Yeah,
What I think is the problem,
right. And we
right?
don't know, it could be, like, both ways, but we're definitely seeing that because
Right.
of this dysregulation that we're
Totally.
in.
No, and I think, from the action points, I think are doing the things in these first 3 to 5 years to build connectivity and belonging. And also, kids are developing their language skills. Just because they can talk and they can use the big words or make sentences doesn't mean they're an adult. I mean, they can sound adultish, right? They can be smart sounds and they repeat and they hear everything and they repeat it all. So it
Right,
might be like, wow, my 3-year-old sounds like a 15-year-old or whatever, but they're a 3-year-old, right?
right.
So we shouldn't grow them up
Project. Yeah,
sooner than they need to be. And we should remind ourselves that they are 3 or they're 5. And so there's some limits to be set. And I think that's the other challenge that our society is sort of managing is how do we set limits, on some of these sort of things and have reasonable expectations for what kids should do. I mean, I think there's just some untenable expectations. Um,
right, there's
and
yeah, like, we've created for the parent and how they should be present, and then also for the child of, like, what they should be, right? So, you know, I mean, that is a reality when we, like, sit back, I think, and think about it, and really from the literature and kind of the conversations happening in these various spaces.
right. Yeah, I mean, just to get back to the detachment, so the psycho detachment sort of touched on one of the things was this undercare, which is the developmentally inappropriate child rearing and undercare, so things that kids aren't getting during that stage. And then part of then creates sort of some developmental lack of some biopsychosocial neurobiology. So what isn't happening when the attachment stuff doesn't happen early, then their whole developmental phase is off kilter. And so we get these behavioral outbursts of, tantrums and other things. Not that 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds can have tantrums, but those are predictable types of things when they don't get their way versus it become just the essence of who they are. And then there's the adult ill being. And so it impacts like the social, moral capacities of like what we're seeing, I think, in the breakdown of our society today is that we then don't develop these mores and good social insights to how we
Right.
should behave in public and with other people. And then it just degrades culture, right? So we become overwhelmed and there's over control, right? So we have people trying to control everybody. So I thought this was like, oh my gosh, an aha moment of like encapsulating what I feel like we're seeing in a very demonstrative sense right now in America and in the world, that there's just too much control, right? I mean, we want to guide our children and give them the capacity to grow and to become their own person. But a lot of what our society is doing is saying, you need to be this way.
Right.
And that's how you have to live within these confines and these structures, and you can't be yourself.
And I'm gonna assume that that was your quote that we typically do on an episode.
Yeah.
And just for our audience, this is a very large topic, and I think there's so many tentacles and roots of like where this can go. And I also, with everything happening in the world, you're giving maybe small bits of like, well, what can I do? Knowing that this is a reality. And I guess, I was just kind of thinking through it from my parent-child relationships I'm building is like this whole idea is like we as parents are not perfect. And so like having a moment to repair per day. Like maybe
Mhm.
you were a little bit short with a child, maybe you said something you didn't really mean, like taking that moment to like redirect or restructure, like and maybe even apologize could be really powerful. And then this whole consumption and their ability to have access to all this information, aka with their devices, I think, is it's enough to like just take 5 minutes a day where you're having that
Right.
no device connection, eye
Right.
contact, maybe a hug. Um, you know, and then I think we talk about a lot, but the idea of sitting down for meals is really powerful in all of this space that we sit in. And then I think from the other thing, the no support and being overwhelmed is get comfortable asking for support or finding that one way to notice the overwhelm and then reach out. That's something that may not be a part of who you are, and it's something that I think gets us back to our roots. Anyway, those are things I'm going to work on, I guess,
I
after
think
like
those are all great. I think
topic.
I always love the way you're able to bring the can-do action points. The other thing I think that what we're also trying to promote is just be an active listener, right? So
Yeah, that's a
a
big one.
lot of what happens in our society is that we have to respond to everything people say. And so really the skill to help develop ourselves, but also for our children, is to show them how to be an active listener. Attention, right? So I
Right,
think our devices and all these things, minimizing distraction. So, the phone goes off, your watch goes off. I mean, if you just look somewhere else while someone's talking to you, it doesn't give them sort of the like attention, right? I think we've
right.
talked about this. It's
I've been
attention.
called out enough by my children. It's very
In
important to
the
get
two
that.
things that I think also to takeaways would be intention and attention, right? Those are things that we need to sort of like develop as sort of build those muscles in ourselves.
Love it. Okay, well, thank you, Dr. Summers, for showing up and talking about this. And I think we'll have a whole lot more to talk about this year.
Yes.
And for our listeners, if this episode hit a nerve or just this idea that you're not alone and it's not, you're failing. And I think many of us are living really in this side of this slippage that we've kind of talked about. So when the win is noticing, I think, naming it and then maybe taking action. But thank you for being here on Illuminating Being and share this episode with someone who is maybe parenting, leading, or trying to stay regulated in this world that we're in today. So, till next
Uh,
time,
uh, Stay warm.
stay warm.